So this talk was a talk I originally gave at the British Society of Refractive Surgery, and the requested topic was how to grow your practice. And I had 20 minutes to talk about it. So I thought I'd actually redo the talk for you guys because I thought it was actually pretty good. And when I was going through the process of trying to understand what to talk about, I had to think about, how to do I give the most value in 20 minutes? And so what I settled on was that I would talk about what's the first thing that any surgeon has to do to grow their practice. What's the first thing? So I made a list of some of those things that we might consider as the first things. And I've heard a lot of these things from different people who are interested in growing practices. Like I said, I've been working with this for about 20 years, and different people come to me with different ideas. And see, these are some of the ideas. Is it like, do I need a bigger facility? Should I get a new logo? Should I get more staff? Right, more hiring, more. Should I just get a new kit, like or upgraded laser, better microscopes, better technician diagnostic equipment, better IT systems. Maybe I need you know, EMR, a new website. That's a very common one. I think in order to get my practice on the road, I need a new website. SEO and paid ads. It's a little less common, but it happens. People come and say, maybe this is what I need. More networking, maybe more Optom referrals, things like that. And here's the thing, all of those things actually matter. Every single thing on this list helps. But honestly, it's none of these things. None of these things are the first thing you need to do. I would even go as far as saying that all these things that are listed here, it could even consider them shiny objects that distract you from the most important thing when choosing to grow your practice. So first of all, before we get into what that thing is, let's talk a little bit about who this is for. So this short presentation is for anyone who owns a practice, or anyone who wants to own a practice one day, or if you're married to someone who owns a practice. So, if you're watching this, then you're going to hear from someone who has spent the last 20 years making eye surgeons into multimillionaires, because that's what we've done. And I'm here to encourage you to believe that it's absolutely possible for you to own your own practice and thrive and do an amazing job for your patients and make an amount of money that is equivalent to the value that you create for your patients. So yeah, that's entirely doable. So that's who this is for. And you might have wondered, like, why do I include the spouse in that list of people of who this is for? And the reason I do that is because of this really significant statistic that I have come across, which is 70% of doctors get all of their practice management advice from friends and family. Okay, so look, that makes no sense. Okay, why would you ask a person who knows nothing about business and likely has lower limits than you do about what you should do, unless, of course, they've gone out there and built an eye surgery practice of the type that you want. Okay. Now, if they've done that, that's different. All right. Because they've been there and they've done that. They can tell you a little bit about what that's about. But if they haven't, then you're not in the right place. Okay. You're not getting the right advice. So here are some of the things that people typically talk about. Some of the things that, that equates to some of the rubbish that you'll hear out there. Like, for example, debt is bad. People, that's the kind of advice you'll hear. Debt is bad. It's very expensive. Wait till you're older. You can't beat corporates. You won't get referrals. Your service is going to suffer if you increase your volume. Marketing is dirty and you don't have any time. Okay. So like all these things could be true, but this really is what I call propaganda. Okay. It's propaganda communicated to you by people who want you to stay where you are. Okay. And some of those people actually care about you. Some of those people actually want the best for you, but they want you to stay where you are because they're comfortable with that. And then there's other people who actually are ahead of you and have more success than you do. And they will tell you these things because they also want you to stay where you are. And because the way they see the world is scarcity minded, and they think, well, if I have only so much of the pie, and if you come in, then you're going to take a piece of that pie from me. Okay. As opposed to the alternative way of thinking about things, which is if you come on board and I help you develop, then we're just going to grow this pie together. And you and everybody else are going to get a bigger slice of the pie because the pie's bigger. Okay. So what this is these are things that really, really affect your mindset. And look, everything that you hear from anybody else, whether they care about you and want the best for you, or whether they actually want you to stay exactly where you are because they don't want you to compete with them, it's all biased. Okay. Everything is biased. So including my bias, right? Like I have a bias too. I have a bias informed by my experience. And my experience is, look, I don't care if you ever hire me or if you ever buy from me. Like that's not going to change my life one way or the other significantly. I'm doing pretty well. I have success. I have a good number of customers that in a sustainable business model that is going to last the next 20 years. I have no issue about that and no concern. This is about you and helping you accept a truth that will enable you to create the freedom that you want in your life, right? Because the freedom that you want in your life is not going to come from what you're currently doing unless you're running an independent practice and choose to sell it one day. So look, this is a guy who didn't buy into any of that bullshit. Okay? So this is a guy who heard all of that, and I was there. I was there when he heard it, and he would tell me about it. This guy is someone who, look, came as an immigrant to this country 20 years ago. Okay. So no established network, no big boys club that was sending him referrals. Right. And he set up his practice and he was doing about 2 eyes a month. And, it wasn't just like starting from sort of status or starting from zero. So actually, I would even argue it was starting from a negative because he was like seen as somebody wild and like an outsider and somebody who was doing things the American way. And, in Britain, we don't do things like that. So yeah, the thing about him is that he didn't have any limits. Okay. Like, and I know that because he realized within 6 months of starting his practice, he realized that he didn't know something. He realized that there was a piece of information, a piece of knowledge that he was lacking. Okay. He didn't know what he didn't know. And he decided at that point that he would ask for help. And the irony here is that despite this guy being known to have a brain the size of a planet when it comes to refractive surgery, he put his ego aside and opened himself up to being coachable. All right. He said, look, I'm really, really good at this surgery thing. And that's my game. That's my gift. That's what I provide to the world. And what I need is for someone else to help me with the business side. Okay. And so he broke through his limits and decided that, you know what, I'm not the only person who can be the architect of my success. I can partner up with somebody who knows something more than I do about a subject that I know nothing about. And now he is able to do pretty much whatever he wants in life, right? I mean, look at that. Sold his clinic for 30 million pounds. I mean, who does that, right? That's a in this business, it's like a unicorn, right? So that's pretty amazing. And I would argue that the number one reason, look, he's very talented. He's made a lot of good decisions. He was here at the right time. He was very courageous. But look, the number one thing that he did differently was that he realized, I can't go at this alone. And that, I would argue, is one of the first things you got to do to grow your practice. You got to decide, okay, like, what are my limits? What are my limits? What can I not do? And then figure out what they are and how to overcome them. So let's talk a little bit about limits. So this is the number one thing that prevents you from growing your practice. It's your limits. It's not any of those other things. It's not the fancy new website. It's not the extended referral network. It's not SEO, paid traffic, or a bigger clinic, or even a better laser. Okay. Now, if you have kids, okay, you know that the world puts limits around them, right? Like gravity, for instance. Gravity is a hard limit, right? It's a physical limit. And sometimes limits are great because they keep us safe and they prevent us from doing dumb things, right? So, when the kid climbs up a monkey bars or, one of those little playground sets, and he falls, she realizes that, yeah, there's a limit to how far up I should travel, because if I fall, I'm going to get really hurt. So that's a limit that they learn. And those kind of limits are healthy for us. Those are natural limits. Things like, for example, oh, I shouldn't touch the stove when it's on. That's a natural limit, right? So you learn not to do that. And that's great. But here's the thing. Natural limits are easily confused with mental constructs. Okay. So there's natural limits like gravity that prevent you from doing things. And there's mental constructs that prevent you from believing that you can do things if you haven't yet done them. Okay. And these mental constructs are just as strong, because the brain doesn't really know the difference between a story that you learned when you touched that hot stove versus a story you made up. Okay. So in this talk, I'm going to give you the key to smash through your limits so that you can not only grow your clinic, but also grow yourself as a human being. Wouldn't that be nice, right? Because these limits not only affect who we are as clinic owners, but also who we are as human beings. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that if you are not living your life as, mentally, physically, as a 5 million pound human being, then you're not going to run a 5 million pound business. Okay. So write this down. You will never run a 5 million or a 10 million pound business or clinic until you act like a 5 to 10 million pound human being. Okay. You got to be that way, think that way, act that way. Okay. So look, what are limits? How do they develop? Well, they develop from experience, and sometimes manufactured experience, and what other people tell us that we convert into lived experience. They keep us safe, which tells the brain that, hey, maybe we should listen to limits. They create realities and stories that hold you back, especially if they're not natural limits. And you can smash through them by living your life as if you have no limits. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So first, before we do that, let's talk about why we love limits. So limits help us get the measure of things, right? So if somebody asks you, for example, how much power does this car have? What's the car's horsepower, right? And you might say, look, it's and I know nothing about cars, but you might say it's a V8 engine, or they might give you some 400 horsepower. Okay, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to understand the limit, right? Limit of how fast that car will go, or how much power that car has. Same thing when they're asking you, maybe when you're buying a house, how big is this house? How many square footage, right? Square meters. You're trying to understand the limit. And because you want to know how much stuff can I get there? Will it serve my needs? Right. And then look, another example is when a patient calls in to your office, and your team usually starts projecting their limits, right? So for example, the patient comes in, they call and they say, hi, how much is it? Right? How much is the surgery? And the person on the line says, and in their voice, they lack confidence in the price. And they say, well, yeah, it's 5,000 pounds. And yeah, it's not cheap, right? Like right away, they're projecting their limits, because they might not be able to afford a surgery that's 5,000 pounds. But the person on the other line might even think, oh, that's affordable. That's cool. But then you tell them that's not cheap. What you've done is you created a projection of that limit, right? So we love to smear our limits around people, right? We love to push our limits to others, because it provides that cognitive alignment that makes us feel comfortable. It's like, if everybody believes in the same limits that I have, then that's a good excuse for why I have the life I have, right? So let's say, for example, you're married, and I've been married for 20 years. And if I would ask my wife a question about whether we should buy something, right? I know her limits are usually bigger than mine, right? When it comes to things we can buy. And, if I said, hey, do you think we should buy this, and whatever it is, right? Just, a substantial thing, asset, whatever. She thinks in bigger numbers than I do. So she's happy to entertain 4 figures, 5 figures without much concern. Whereas me, on the other hand, I I get a little bit, whoa, okay, because we just have different limits, and I'm not sure necessarily where they came from, but they're different. The inverse is also true. So let's say if you ask your spouse or your parents, hey, I'm thinking about growing my own practice and I might need to borrow some money. And all of a sudden, what happens? The limits start shooting up, right? And they'll say, oh, I'm not so sure if that's a good time to do that. Like, well, what about the economy right now? Are we heading into a recession? What about inflation? Costs are going up. Oh, think about the debt. Think about the debt, right? So people love to spread their limits on others. And that's how you get limits. And so the very first thing to understand is that when you bring an idea to someone, there are only a few things that are going to happen. Okay. One, and Zig Ziglar says, does this great. He says that there's two different types of goals. There's give up goals. Like, or for example, when you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to give up chocolate for 40 days, or I'm going to, give up fatty foods, or I'm going to give up sitting on the couch for, every single night. I'm going to go to the gym. Everybody's all rooting for you. Everybody loves that, right? Everybody's like, yeah, you can do it. Those are give up goals. I want to give up smoking. Great. Everybody's going to be in your corner. But go up goals are a different story. So it's like, you know what? I'm going to make, let's say, in my practice, I'm going to make 2 million this year. Okay. That's a go up goal. And then all of a sudden, people aren't so much in your corner. Okay. And again, that because it's cognitive dissonance. It creates this cognitive dissonance in their minds about who you are. Right. It's like, who are you going to be when you're a 2 million pound practice owner? You're going to be super busy. You're not going to have any time for me. You're going to let go of all the other things that you enjoy doing. You're not going to have balance. All these things, all these limits start to creep in, and they start to smear those limits all over you. So two things are going to happen if you go to somebody and ask for their help about growing your practice or growing your circumstances. They're going to either keep your limits the same. All right. Keep them in place, reinforce them, or they're going to raise your limit. Okay. And look, one of the biggest examples of this is doctors taking money advice from accountants. All right. That makes literally no sense. Okay. Because what is an accountant's job? An accountant's job is to reduce the amount of tax you pay, right? To help you avoid tax legally. And if they put a limit on taxes, then what you're doing is you're also putting a limit on income. You're putting a limit on profit, right? Because you only pay tax on your profits. So that's the worst person to go for money growing advice, right? Because their limit is tax. So that's the opposite of making more money, right? That's like asking me to give you advice on how to do a treatment, right? Like, it just makes no sense. I'm not the right guy. So there's another one that's called the spending limit. That's a very common one, right? If I said to you, how much do you spend on marketing this month? And you say, oh, I spend 500 pounds a month. And what if I said, well, why don't you spend 5,000 pounds a month? And you go, oh, no. I could never do that. So what's happening? Your system is going into seizure. You're like, oh, no, that's crossing my limit. I could never pay that much money. That's too much money, right? And that happens. That actually happens. Whereas at the same time, I could show you, well, if you spend 5,000 pounds a month, you're going to get 10 times your return than you spend on the 500. In fact, probably more, because the 500 is not doing anything for you, but the 5,000 gets you traction. But still, it's like, oh, 5,000. So that's a limit. And because you have that limit that you will never spend that much money on marketing, you're limiting your growth. You're limiting your success. And why do you do that, right? You do that in part because it helps you excuse your results right now, right? It's like, well, marketing costs too much money. That's the problem with this business, right? It just costs too much money. Wow. That essentially becomes your story. It's like, you're not successful because marketing costs too much money, right? You're not successful because it's really hard to hire good staff, right? You're not successful because the government is imposing regulations on you, right? All these stories that you tell yourself as to why you're not successful are excuses. And no one will tell you that, because you're a doctor. And no one tells doctors that they're making excuses for their lack of success, do they? Guess what? I do. So if you want that, you need to find somebody like me who will be able to talk to you the way that nobody else talks to you, right? Why? Because I'm not intimidated by doctors and their excuses about their lack of success, because I see it every single day. Okay. Now, my experience, there's two types of surgeons, right? So there's the ones that don't believe something is worth investing in until they have seen the return. Okay. You get that? I don't believe that's a good investment. Why? Oh, because I haven't seen the return on that investment. What? So the first type of doctor says, prove it to me first, and then I will believe it. Then I'll go do it. So it's funny. Very recently, I had a doctor approach me and tell me exactly that. It's like, is there any way that you could defer your fees? I really believe that you can help me, but could you defer your fees until after we get the success, right? After we generate the patients. What? That's not how it works, right? That's not how business works. That's not how life works. That's like me saying to my university or you saying to your school, look, teach me first, spend all this time investing in me, give me my degree, and then when I get my job as an eye surgeon, then I'll pay you. No, that's just not how the world works, right? If you want to generate a return on an investment, you have to invest first. Okay. It's return on investment, not investment on return. Okay. So now the other type of doctor, so this one, and the one that maps the future and says, I will do what it takes to get there. The other doctor understands that return follows an investment. You see, limits are what creates a problem here, right? From understanding inputs like time and money and energy, they result in and are correlated to outputs. For example, return, right? So, and what you most likely haven't thought through is how your personal limits are related to your modus operandi, to how you operate in the world, right? They're influencing everything. So how you think about how transactions should happen, that's part of the influence. Okay. So look, our brains are filters and they're full of limits. And, anytime you find yourself saying, I can't spend that kind of money, or I can't hire good staff, or I can't, get that new laser, or I can't, whatever, I can't grow my clinic. Well, that's a limit that you've created for yourself in many ways, because there's another guy just like you, or another woman just like you, who's been able to do it. Probably in your same town. Okay. So don't give me that like, oh, I can't do it in this town. You don't know my town. My town sucks. Well, look, somebody else is successful in your town or in another town, just as shitty. So yeah, I think you can do it. So like, sometimes it's good to have limits, right? But like other times it's not so good to put limits, like especially like, what's the thing you don't want to put a limit on? Yourself, your prospects, your success. That's what you don't want to put a limit on, right? I go like, well, what, you might say, I might ask you, what's your limit on paying for a house? And you say 15 years, right? I might turn around and say, well, why don't you just pay it off in 7, right? You say, well, I can't do that. Well, that's your limit. What if you could? What if you grew your practice to the point where you could pay your house off in 7? Okay. What's the limit for growing your practice this year? You say 15%. What I say, well, what about 50% or 100%? You say, well, I can't do that. Why? Because you just don't know how, right? You just haven't done it before. But you know what? For me, that's commonplace. I've done that so many times that it's like walking through the park, right? So one person's limits are somebody else's commonplace. I mean, whenever you say I can't do that, that's your limit. So look, we've had to smash through a lot of limits, and one of the best ways to smash limits is to track return, right? So I'll give you a story. I won't tell you which one of these it was, but they've all got good results. But there's one of these guys who was seeing 20 patients a month, and their patients were paying six grand every time, every time they paid him. And like, so when we met, he was making, 120 grand, right? So a year later, he's seeing more than double as many. And at one point he commented to me, he said, this has been great, because like, look, I said, hey, wasn't this wonderful? We should celebrate. We doubled the business. And he's like, well, it's been great, but I paid you guys a lot of money to make that happen. I had to stop and say to him, oh, let me help you do some math here. Okay. So this is what happened. This is what actually happened. So you paid me, say, something like $4,000 a month. Okay. And if you keep doing what I tell you to do, you'll make that back on every patient. Okay. And today you have 20 more a month than you did when we met. Okay. And by the way, now that number a couple of years later is 80. Okay. So when we did the math at the end of the year, he had made over 1.4 million as a result, in large part after the investment of $4,000 a month. Now, Does that make sense? Well, anybody who can do math will agree that that makes sense. But what was the problem here? His focus was on how much he was spending, not his return, right? And we do this all the time. So what's he at risk at? He's at risk at limiting his rewards, because if he decides, oh, I'm spending too much money for this reward, he's at risk at limiting that reward. And that's the definition of being your own worst enemy. Okay, so definitely don't do that. Now, one of the things in this business, and we've hit that plateau, that constraint many times with our customers, it's like being busy, right? And being busy is often the goal for a lot of people when they first come to meet us. It's like, I want to be busy. I want to be busy with patients, and that makes sense, right? Every single patient might say, bring me more patients. Great. But the thing is what that does, it makes you busy. So then, at that point, that's the model. It's like, great, success, right? 100% capacity. But you know what? That's the surest road to burnout. You cannot stay there for too long. So I say to them, okay, well, it's time to get another surgeon, right? Time to get another surgeon. You're too busy. It's time to get another surgeon. And what would you say if I said that? Time to grow another surgeon into your practice. You might say, well, I can't get another surgeon. I say, why not? You'll be like, oh, well, because my patients, they love me. They love me. That's why they come. That's why I'm successful. Okay, so that's not true. That's a limit that you made for yourself to make you feel good about you. And your patients couldn't care less. All they want is they just want the result that you provide. Okay, and that result can be provided by many, and you know that because there are hundreds and thousands of people just like you doing the same thing all over the world. So what makes you so special? Right? So no, you can definitely get another surgeon, teach them, duplicate yourself, create a leader, and double your practice that way, right? And if you don't do that, you just made that up. Okay, you just made up that story. So here's the truth about everything you've never done, right? So your practice is the size it is because of your limits. That's your limit, right? Maybe you're unconsciously incompetent potentially, and you may have wasted a lot of time in that step. So if you come to me and say, I want to make $1 million in my practice this year, I'll respond to, yeah, sure, let's make $1 million. Let's do that. For me, that's commonplace, like I said, right? Because I've done it so many times that it's almost unconscious. Okay. It's hard work, but it's unconscious. All right. For you, it might be a really big deal. All right. So you realize that you can't figure this out on your own. And in that moment, you move to the conscious competence. Okay. And that's step 2. And then you ultimately become consciously competent. And that's step 3. Okay. So let me show you these steps. This is Maslow's learning model of how we learn. Okay. And the first step you can see here is unconscious competence. I don't know what I don't know. Number 2 is conscious competence. That's where I realize, okay, maybe I don't know some things, and maybe I need to realize that I don't know those things. Okay. So what do you do then? Okay. So if you want to learn how to play tennis, you hire a tennis instructor. If you want to snowboard, you hire a snowboarding instructor. If you want to do weightlifting, you get a personal trainer. If you want to do accounting, right? If you want to manage your books, you get an accountant. If you want to, defend yourself in a legal case because you don't know how to do that, you hire a lawyer. So why don't you do that with your practice? Right? Why do you stay in step 1 for so long instead of moving right to step 2? See, for me, I'd much rather move right to step 2. All right, with everything I do. And all of those examples that I gave you, I've done. Because I don't sit at step 1 for too long, right? And that's what you need to do. So incompetence is where you too often choose to stay. And I always think about this with my house, right? Where I live. It's like when I need to do something in my house, I don't waste days trying to fix it while only making it worse. What I do is I go, it's perfectly okay. And I'm still a man by calling a handyman and getting him to come in and fix it for me. Because I don't do DIY, right? And neither should you when it comes to building your practice, right? Don't do DIY. Don't DIY your practice, right? So this all is impacted by who you surround yourself with. Here's the thing about you doctors and surgeons. I love you guys. I hang out with you. It's great. But here's the deal. You are typically the smartest person in the room, right? And everyone around you, whether it's in your business life or your personal life, is typically reinforcing your limits because they think, well, you know what you're doing. You're the smartest among us. So everything you must do must be right. Okay. So typically it's like who you surround yourself with is all those people who are going to consistently reinforce those limits or help you break through. So what you need to do is you need to get yourself incredibly uncomfortable for a while and either challenge your own limits. And if you can't do that because it's hard, then you need to find somebody who will. Okay. So that's how you change that. You need to go through a process of breaking through your limits. So here's my recipe on how to break through your limits. So you have to expose yourself to someone who will help you raise your limits. Okay. Because that's really hard to do by yourself. All right. And you expose yourself to realized visions, right? Real visions that have been materialized of what you want to become. So you surround yourself with people who've done better than you, right? Other doctors, other surgeons who've had clinics, and other people who can tell you about their stories, right? And put yourself in a position that you're ready to learn. And my whole business over the last 20 years, some people think it's, oh, you guys make websites for people, right? Well, you guys do SEO for people. You do practice development. No. Those are just tools. What we do is we help eye surgeons raise their limits. That's my job. I help eye surgeons raise their limits, and I do it quarterly. Okay, quarterly meetings. We go through every single meeting. We go. What are the limits? What are our bottlenecks right now? How are we going to overcome them? And all the times they say I can't, I say, well, what if you could? Okay, let's find a way. Because I expose them to what's possible. Okay, I expose them to other people who do just like them and are doing the things they want to do. Okay, and like, just if, for example, imagine you're a surgeon working in a small town and you're doing £2 million a year, $2 million a year. You're the bomb, right? You think you're pretty good. But then you walk into a room or you walk into a webinar and you're surrounded by people who are making 10 million. All of a sudden you realize I got limits. Okay. So yeah, then at that point you might submit to positioning yourself in a position to learn. And that's what you need to do. So in review, the biggest limit to your growth is you and your limits. Okay. You and your limits. And most people are better at keeping their limits than smashing through them. So how do you keep your limits? Well, that's easy, right? Just admire your problems and just repeat them again and again and again. This is why I'm so unsuccessful. I can't do this. I can't do that. It's hard getting staff. I can't get people to say yes. I'm no good at sales, right? I don't want to betray my ethics. All this stuff that you tell yourself, right? Marketing is dirty. You make that your story, right? And that's how you can hang on to those limits and hang out. Oh, that's the other thing. Hang out with a lot of people who reinforce those limits. You know, all these yes men and yes women who basically treat you like God's gift to creation, right? And don't ever challenge you, right? So how do I raise limits on people? Well, I take these steps. So I identify your limits. I help you do that. I acknowledge that you're unconsciously incompetent, okay? And I help you do that. I help you reframe your language so that when you say I can't, it's not much about more about I can't. It's more like I just haven't done that yet, or I don't know how to yet. Okay. I help you become a student, and in that way you change your limit. And when you change your limit, you change your return. Okay. So that's how we do it. It's very simple, 6 steps. And it's those who remain unconsciously incompetent simply won't change their limits. And when they don't do that, they won't change their returns. So who are you going to be, right? This is the question you have to ask yourself. Who do you want to be, right? Are you want to be the person who has to do it themselves before they believe it can be done? Or are you going to be the person who believes they can do it and ask for help because they admit they need it, okay? So who do you want to be? If you still think hiring another doctor is a bad idea, if you still think gaining more patients will hurt your patient experience, if you think marketing makes you look bad, if you still think it's impossible to have $1 million, or $2 million, or $5 million, £10 million practice or dollar practice, if you've made it through this whole talk and you still think that you've hit your potential, then maybe you have. Okay. And not everybody is coachable. I've certainly found that. Not everyone wants to grow. Not everyone wants to make more money, and not everybody wants to have a greater impact on their community. See, my belief is that if you're good at what you do, you have an ethical and moral obligation to do more of it. So for those of you who do want to break through your limits, who are ready to be coachable, schedule a call, okay? Schedule a call with me or Laura Livesey today. And in just a short amount of time, 15 minutes, we'll get to a point where we'll see if we're compatible. And then we'll take you on a journey where we will smash through your limits. Okay. And so that you can grow, so that you can double, and in some cases, 10 times your practice. And when you have access to the right expert knowledge, you can push through those limits, and you can exceed your expectations and grow beyond the limits that you've ever imagined for yourself. Okay. So this is how you do it. There's a link around here. It's liveseysolar.com if you're seeing this on YouTube. And you'll see a link for Are We Compatible? That's the first step. And that's how we can do this. Okay, that's how we can get started. So do let me know if you want to break through your limits, and we'll see if we can do that for you. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.